Imagine for a second, you're just sitting in your living room. You've just moved into a brand new apartment. It's totally quiet. You're finally settling in, and then you hear it.
Yeah, that dreaded sound.
Right. It's this rhythmic, sort of muffled thud coming from the floorboards right beneath your feet. And you find out your downstairs neighbor is this 83-year-old mother,
Oh, wow.
and she lives with her son, who actually has schizophrenia.
Yeah.
So while she goes out to a welfare center during the day to just, get a brief moment of respite, her son is locked inside that apartment all day long.
Man, that's a tough situation.
It really is. Sometimes he makes these incredibly loud, totally unintelligible speeches to an empty room. And sometimes he takes a blunt tool and just hits the wall. Thud, thud, thud.
It is exactly the kind of scenario that for most people immediately triggers this sort of defensive reaction.
Absolutely.
Because, society conditions us to view that kind of noise as an infringement on our peace, right? You might think about filing noise complaints or worrying about property values.
Yeah, or calling the building manager immediately.
Exactly. When we're faced with severe mental illness and disruption like that, the standard societal reflex is just to demand distance and containment. Just, get it away from me.
Right. But the person who actually shared this story in our source material today had a deeply unexpected reaction to all of this.
They really did.
They weren't annoyed at all. They actually felt empathetic and almost like apologetic. They noted that whenever that banging echoed through the floorboards in the middle of the night, they didn't hear a nuisance.
Yeah.
They heard a desperate plea. They interpreted that banging as the sound of society's completely neglected problems demanding our attention. And, that specific reaction is the launching pad for what we are getting into today.
It's a profound shift in perspective. The material we are examining to explore this is a lecture that was given in Buon on April 19th, 2026.
Okay.
And the mission for this deep dive is to really look at the speaker's highly unconventional, philosophical, and, systemic response to this exact apartment scenario.
That's a fascinating text.
It really is. It fundamentally challenges how we view mental illness, how we process criminal behavior, and even how we pursue spiritual healing as a collective.
Okay, let's unpack this, because right out of the gate, we really have to make it clear to you listening, this is not a standard medical discussion.
Yeah, definitely not.
Like, we aren't going to talk about pharmacology or neurotransmitters or anything like that. This is a radical reframing of the mechanics of human suffering. So, setting the medical definitions aside, how does the speaker in this lecture actually interpret that person hitting the wall?
Well, the primary thesis presented in the lecture is that conditions like schizophrenia are not just merely individual tragedies or isolated biological anomalies.
Then what are they?
The speaker views them as structural failures. The argument rests on the idea that the scholars, the intellectuals, the experts tasked with designing our society have basically failed.
Failed how, exactly?
They failed to deeply research the root causes of human friction. And they failed to build a proper state-run system to address that underlying suffering. So because of that massive blind spot at the top, society is now just filled with neglected people falling through the cracks at the bottom.
Yeah, and the way the text describes these neglected individuals is really intense. Like, the speaker refers to them as sacrifices or victims for society.
That's right.
And, calling someone suffering from severe mental illness a sacrifice sounds almost archaic, maybe even a little cruel to modern ears. How does the speaker justify using that kind of terminology?
Well, the cruelty, according to the text anyway, lies in our neglect, not the terminology itself. The sacrifice concept is rooted in this really deep philosophy of cause and effect. The argument is that nature, or the universe, deliberately creates these extreme situations to force society out of its complacency.
Wait, deliberately?
Yes, deliberately. These individuals are bearing the brunt of our collective dysfunction. They are the visible manifestations of the invisible rot in our social structures. The universe is essentially using their suffering as a necessary friction, like an alarm bell, demanding that we finally do the societal research we've been actively avoiding.
So what does this all mean for us? Is the speaker basically saying these individuals are like the canary in the coal mine?
That is a really great way to put it.
And if we just, lock the canary away in a facility, just shut it behind a door, without actually fixing the toxic gas leak in the mine, nature is just going to send another canary.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. The text explicitly states that if one person fails to alert society to these systemic issues, someone else will inevitably be made to take their place.
Wow.
Yeah, the universe requires these disruptive elements to point out that we are living incorrectly. If we just hide them away in institutions and completely ignore the root cause, the problem simply shifts to a new host.
That makes me think of how the speaker connects this to a much broader historical pattern.
Oh, the part about the gangs.
Exactly. They bring up this idea that long before formalized governments or police forces or legal systems even existed, human communities organically produced gangs, thugs, and outlaws.
Right.
Under this philosophy, those disruptive forces weren't just random aberrations, right? They emerged naturally as societal symptoms to highlight localized frustrations and inequalities. They were nature's way of creating friction so the community would be forced to address an imbalance.
That historical context is crucial here. Gangs and outlaws represented a symptom that demanded to be researched.
Right.
The universe introduces a chaotic element, and the community's responsibility is to figure out why the environment produced that chaos. If they don't, the chaos just escalates.
But that raises a pretty practical question. If the person hitting the wall or the outlaw causing chaos is the extreme final alarm bell, what does the earlier warning sound like?
That is the big question.
Right. If these symptoms are a cosmic cry for help, who is supposed to be answering the call before it reaches that breaking point? Where do people go?
Well, that brings us to what might be the speaker's most provocative claim. The text argues that right now on Earth, literally everyone is a patient.
Hold on. I get the concept of a shared human struggle, but calling a corporate CEO who is feeling burned out a patient right alongside someone struggling with clinical schizophrenia, that feels like a massive stretch.
It does at first glance, yeah.
How do they justify linking those two vastly different experiences?
It requires looking at the word patient through a completely different lens. The speaker explicitly lists, university professors, corporate executives, celebrities, and even beauty queens like Miss Korea.
Really? Miss Korea?
Yes. They might not be physically diseased, they might not be lying in a hospital bed,
Hmm.
but the foundational definition of a patient in this philosophy isn't about physical pathology.
Then what is it about?
It's about being deeply frustrated, feeling trapped, and struggling to navigate the fundamental weight of your own life. Under that definition, the entire globe is experiencing a patient epidemic, just at varying degrees of severity.
So if you're listening to this right now on your commute and you're feeling that low-level, persistent hum of frustration about your job, your relationships, or just your general direction in life under this framework, you are part of this global patient epidemic.
Exactly. You are experiencing the early warning signs of that societal gas leak.
But when people feel that kind of internal crushing frustration, they don't usually book an appointment with a general practitioner, do they?
No, they definitely don't. The source points out that the first line of defense for a struggling human mind is rarely a medical hospital.
Right.
When people are lost, they almost always turn to spiritual and religious leaders. They go to Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, or traditional shamans. They seek out the people who claim to have answers about the deeper meaning of life and the mechanics of the unseen world.
I see the logic there, but here's where it gets really interesting, maybe a bit confusing. If literally everyone, from the overwhelmed executive to the neighbor struggling with schizophrenia, is eventually seeking out these religious leaders and spiritual guides for help, why isn't the problem being solved? Why are people still banging on walls if these institutions exist everywhere?
That is the exact bottleneck the speaker identifies. The reason the problem isn't being solved is a complete systemic failure of leadership.
Interesting.
The source material argues that these spiritual leaders, religious figures, and shamans are ultimately failing their followers because they lack fundamental education.
What does the text mean by fundamental education here? Are we talking about like academic degrees, theology degrees?
No, not academic credentials at all. It means an education in the root mechanics of human life and social interaction.
Oh, I see.
The critique is that these leaders rely on their specific dogmas, their rituals, or their supposed spiritual magic to treat the immediate emotional symptoms. They offer temporary comfort, but they are not doing the rigorous work of researching the fundamental why behind the person's suffering.
Right.
They aren't teaching the individual how to understand the personal and structural failures that led to their frustration in the first place.
It's like treating a massive structural crack in your home's foundation by hiring someone to just paint over it.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Right. The painter comes in, applies a fresh, beautiful coat of paint, and you feel great about your living room for a week.
Yeah.
But the house is still slowly sinking into the ground.
That analogy hits the mark perfectly. The ritual, the prayer, or the shamanic reading is just the fresh coat of paint. It masks the structural failure. What's fascinating here is the radical solution the speaker proposes to fix this foundation.
Which is what?
The speaker doesn't just want to tear down these religious institutions, they demand unprecedented collaboration. The text suggests that to actually cure this global epidemic of frustration, we need everyone sitting at the exact same table. Intellectuals, directors of medical facilities, and yes, even shamans who deal with the spiritual realm.
Wow. It's an incredible visual, like a sociologist, a medical doctor, a priest, and a shaman all sitting in a boardroom together.
Yeah, exactly.
And the goal isn't to debate whose magic is real, but to basically pool their observations and research the root causes of societal suffering.
The source insists this interdisciplinary approach is absolutely necessary, because if that deep internal frustration is not solved while the person is merely at the mental patient stage, the consequences escalate.
Escalate how?
According to this philosophy, unaddressed mental and spiritual pressure eventually manifests physically. It turns into physical illness, cellular mutations, or even brings about external accidents. The physical body breaks down because the earlier invisible warnings were repeatedly ignored.
So the stakes of doing this research aren't just achieving some vague sense of inner peace. It's literal physical survival.
Absolutely.
So if our societal and spiritual leaders fail to teach us how to research the root causes of our suffering and we remain complacent, the universe doesn't just let it go. The unlearned lessons compound.
And the source material illustrates this escalation by examining two institutions that we normally think of as complete opposites: the criminal justice system and religious temples. Oh, this part is fascinating.
Let's start with prisons. The speaker offers a really sharp critique of how we handle those who break the law. In an ideal world, a prison should be what the text calls an edification center.
Meaning what, exactly?
A place where staff and inmates collaborate to deeply research why the crime occurred. What was the exact failure in understanding, the exact localized frustration that led to that action?
But the text notes that our current reality is the exact opposite of that. Instead of being a place of reflection and root cause analysis, the prison system functions more like a networking event and a trade school for criminal behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The inmates literally refer to it as going to school.
Right.
Because society has failed to teach them how to analyze the root causes of their mindset, they use the time behind bars to analyze their procedural mistakes. They sit around with other inmates and figure out how they got caught.
So someone who gets locked up for a minor theft learns from the environment, levels up their tactical skills, and comes out prepared to commit a major fraud.
They haven't changed their internal mindset at all. They've just refined their external tactics to avoid friction next time. The lesson wasn't learned, so the behavior and the societal damage just escalate.
We see that mechanical escalation in the secular world with prisons, but the speaker takes this exact same concept of compounding consequences for unlearned lessons and applies it to a setting we view as entirely peaceful and holy.
Right, the traditional act of bowing in a temple. The Korean practice of bowing, or jail.
Yes.
It's a staple of Buddhist practice. You see it constantly, people quietly bowing in temples, seeking peace. But the speaker strips away all the mystical, serene aura of the bow and frames it as a strict mathematical system of cosmic discipline. Let's walk through how this works, because the progression is highly specific. It starts with 3 bows.
So imagine you experience a small frustration in your life, a conflict at work, or maybe a dispute with a friend. Things aren't going your way, so you seek out a temple. The standard initial prescription is 3 bows. You physically lower your knees, place your hands on the ground, and touch your forehead to the floor 3 times. The text acknowledges that doing this actually does provide a small measure of temporary relief. Your situation might seemingly improve for a short time.
But here's the catch. The speaker points out, you got the relief, but you didn't do the research.
Exactly.
You didn't investigate why that conflict happened. You just performed a physical action and enjoyed the temporary emotional soothing. Because your underlying thoughts and arrogant behaviors are identical, it is a mathematical certainty that a new, slightly bigger problem is going to arise.
You ignored the warning, so the universe raises the stakes. You go back to the temple with this new frustration, and now 3 bows won't cut it. Just like a parent scolding a child harder the second time, the temple prescribes 7 bows.
It's the universe turning up the volume on the alarm bell. But the most fascinating part of this progression happens when you hit strike 3. If you still refuse to do the internal work, the frustration returns heavier than ever, and the prescription becomes 108 bows. Anyone who has ever attempted 108 full prostrations knows it is exhausting.
It's brutal.
Takes a serious physical toll. But why that specific number?
The number 108 isn't just an arbitrary spiritual metric in this framework. The speaker breaks it down generationally. The calculation defines one generation as 36 years.
Okay.
So the 108 bows represent 3 generations, 36 multiplied by 3. You are essentially doing 36 bows to acknowledge the stubborn wrongdoings and unlearned lessons of your own generation, your parents' generation, and your grandparents' generation.
Wow. It's an accumulation of arrogance across time. And the text provides some historical context for this, noting that it aligns with the cultural mindset of traditional Korean society, particularly during the Joseon era.
Right.
The unwritten rule of society was that you were granted leniency twice. But on that third strike, you face this massive, multi-generational penance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture the speaker is painting, we have to completely demystify the ritual. Bowing isn't a magical spell that cleanses your soul. The speaker calls it literal discipline or punishment gihap in Korean.
It's essentially the physics of the universe applied to your ego. The logic is that you walked around society with your head held too high. You acted arrogantly, assuming you understood everything, blaming others for the friction in your life instead of looking inward.
Spot on.
Because you refuse to mentally humble yourself and research your own flaws, the universe mandates a physical correction. It forces you to take that stiff, arrogant neck and physically lower it all the way to the dirt.
You are being forced to physically enact the humility you completely refuse to practice mentally. The friction you experienced in society was the universe's way of trying to break down your ego.
Right.
If you treat the bow merely as an exercise routine or some magic trick to make your bad luck go away, it is entirely useless. You will walk out of the temple, raise your head high again, and the cycle will just continue.
And the text points out one final, staggering escalation to this cycle. We mentioned the Joseon era, where society gave you 2 chances, and the third was the heavy 108 bows. In that historical era, there was no 4th chance.
No.
If you failed to learn after all that, society simply didn't tolerate you anymore. But modern society is much more lenient.
Way more lenient. We allow people to make a 4th major mistake, or even more. We give endless chances.
But the universe's math doesn't just cancel out because modern society is lenient. The toll still has to be paid. So if you fail to research your wrongdoings after all of those warnings and you blindly go back to the temple for that 4th chance, what is the new prescription?
3,000.
3,000. Doing that takes hours upon hours. It destroys your knees. It induces a massive, grueling physical breakdown.
It is the ultimate structural reset. It is the universe saying, you have so thoroughly refused to research your own life. You're so stubbornly clung to your arrogance despite every warning that we're going to incapacitate you with physical exhaustion. The sheer physical toll of 3,000 bows literally breaks the mind's ability to maintain its ego. It forces reflection through sheer exhaustion. It is the physical manifestation of what happens when an individual or an entire society refuses to learn.
It is such a profound way to look at everything we've talked about today. To pull all these threads together for you listening, we started this deep dive with a very localized, very intimate scenario. A neighbor sitting in a quiet apartment listening to someone with schizophrenia banging a blunt tool against a wall.
Right.
And through the lens this 2026 lecture, we've watched that single thud on the wall expand into a massive, interconnected critique of human arrogance.
The connections are striking when you lay them all out like that. The person locked in the apartment acting as a societal alarm bell, the criminal who uses a prison cell to learn better schemes rather than reflecting on their mindset, the person sweating through their 108th bow in a temple hoping for a magical cure. They are all bound by the exact same mechanism. They are all symptoms of a society and of individuals who refuse to research their own fundamental frustrations. They are caught in endless loops because they focus entirely on the symptom, the noise, the arrest, the ritual, rather than the root cause.
It makes you realize how often we just want the quick fix. We just want the painter to come in and cover the crack in the foundation. We just want the noise from the downstairs apartment to stop so we can go back to sleep.
Which brings us to the core value of this entire philosophy. Knowledge is only valuable when it is applied.
Exactly.
It's not enough to just nod along to these concepts intellectually. The source material is actively challenging us to stop relying on temporary fixes. A locked door won't cure the societal neglect that produces severe mental illness. A prison cell won't cure the ignorance that produces crime.
Right.
And mindlessly lowering your head to the floor won't cure the arrogance that creates conflict in your personal life. We have to do the hard, uncomfortable work of discovering why these things are happening. We have to become active researchers of our own lives.
We have to ask ourselves how we are contributing to the friction. Which leaves us with a pretty intense thought for you to carry with you today. Think about a recurring frustration or conflict in your own life right now, something that just keeps popping up, whether it's at work, in your relationships, or just in your own head, no matter what you try to do to fix it.
Hmm.
Are you genuinely researching the root cause of why it keeps happening? Are you examining your own assumptions and arrogance? Or are you just doing your three bows, lowering your head temporarily and hoping the universe will let you off the hook this time? Because if you don't figure out the root cause,
Hmm.
sooner or later you're going to hear that banging on the wall.